Hey guys, lots of good stuff to go over today. I just got moved into the new place, but nonetheless, I'm still very, very excited about Cyberpunk, as I'm sure many of you are. So screw sound dampening, screw getting a proper studio set up before we film this. I'm excited and I want to talk about it, which is what we're going to do. So to begin with, this is coming off of an article that was written by WCCF Tech. I'm not sure what the acronym stands for, but nonetheless, it's a well-written article. And basically what it is it's a quotation of the PlayStation official magazine, the September 2018 issue, or issue 152, if that works better for you, wherein one of the lead writers over at CD Projekt RED, a guy that's been working there since like 2013, he talks about the writing staff and the writing design that's going into a game like Cyberpunk. And this is interesting, particularly because not much is known about the structure of how they've gone about working on this game. It's all been very, very hush-hush. We know the universe it's set in. We know roughly what they're trying to do. We know that the original game's designer and creator is fully behind this project and is incredibly impressed by what they're doing. So we know that it's true. We know that it's honest to what Cyberpunk is about. But at the same time, we don't really know how they're turning that into a video game, because Cyberpunk started as a board game, like a pen and paper, board game's the wrong name, but like a pen and paper RPG. And now it's being turned into a huge open world RPG on modern consoles, and that's a totally different game, pun intended, I suppose. So it's interesting to see how they're approaching it. Now, when he was asked about the team size and how they're approaching writing all of the quests, all of the stories, everything for the game, Stanislaw responded as such. He said, quote, "It's around 8 to 10 people, the team that is, 10 at the moment. So it's quite a team. At the beginning, it's like all the team sort, and on a higher level, it's decided what's the direction. Then we come up with a sort of story outline, so to speak, a very bird's eye view of how the story progresses. But narrative is key at CD Projekt RED. I like to say that narrative is key rather than story is key, because it all comes down to all the narrative teams really working closely," end quote. Now, this at first glance is just a very bland statement. Like, yes, we have a big team, the writers kind of throw out ideas, and then the upper management decides what direction we go and what the story is actually going to end up settling on, which is fine, like who cares, whatever. But what is more interesting is that they understand the distinction between narrative is key rather than story is key. And of course, like, we're reading into this a little bit. Obviously, we don't know strictly what he means by narrative is key, but in his explanation, it all comes down to how those teams work together, because a narrative is more of an overarching approach to the story, whereas the story is more micro instead of macro. So when you're designing a game like The Witcher 3, for instance, you can't simply have a bunch of individual teams that are working independently, throwing together quests, and then they throw it all in the game at the end of the day and hope that it works out and it has a fairly uniform tone. And I talked about this before in my videos analyzing like Fallout 4's questing systems and stories within, which were very, very bland and just not good. And that was because, as we found out with an interview that Emil Pagliarulo gave later on, the quests that were designed for Fallout 4 were designed by the level designers, by some of the character artists. They were based on ideas and thoughts by the writing staff, but then also some texture artists, like all over the place, which is cool that they're allowing everybody to get involved, everyone to participate, and that's fun, like who cares? But at the same time, it's also not great, because there's a reason writing staffs exist. There's a reason that you usually have an entire department that's just handling that stuff for your production. So in Fallout 4, what it ended up being is, yeah, a lot of fun stuff, but you have one quest where you are hunting down a guy that's very wealthy in the top of a tower that's hanging out with a bunch of super mutants, and then the next quest you run into, you're saving a kid out of a refrigerator that's been locked in there since the war started over 200 years before, and somehow hasn't died or had any issues. Like, and I get it, it's fun, it's campy, it's Fallout, it's not supposed to be super serious and intense, and some people absolutely loved it, but there was a real lack of cohesive tonality, and there's a real lack of consistency, because in one quest you end up with ghouls being established as a group of living beings that need food, and then in the next you have a character that's been locked in a fridge for 200 years. and has never gotten out and is still doing just fine. So that sort of dissonance, narrative dissonance, is not something that you would find in The Witcher 3, or at the very least, if you found it, it would be very, very you'd be very hard pressed to find it. And that's because all of those narrative teams that are writing the quests work together and all come back and they talk together constantly. As he goes on to say, quote, every department has a different focus, whether everything is logical, whether it works as levels, how good the cinematics and the mood of the scene is. Then it comes back to us and we organically change the scenes in that way as the other teams suggest. We write the dialogue, it comes back to us again. So it really is a multi-layered process. We use the mythos as a strong road sign for us in terms of mood and atmosphere because we're making a similar universe to what you've seen in 2020, Cyberpunk 2020, but we are giving ourselves the creative freedom to do major tweaks to what the universe is and what rules it has. That's sort of needed because Cyberpunk 2020, which I played as a role-playing game, was pen and paper, right? So we're making a very different game over here, but it's, for us, it's really about the mood and what's important about the world, end quote. So at the core, the main important portion of that quotation is the beginning, just saying that these teams work together, are constantly giving feedback back and forth, and then it goes back out to the level design team. They say, well, actually, we can't do this. We need this to work. We need this to be tweaked. We need this to happen. And they all work together. And that's how it should be. That's how you create a masterpiece like The Witcher 3 when everything is working together in unison, instead of just trying to let the level designer write the quest all by himself and then have one or two writers that handle sort of dialogue, maybe, kind of, sort of, but not really. The last bit is about this whole discussion is really interesting, just because I think when people sit down to play a video game in the modern day, you end up with two types of people. Like the serious gamers that want something super intense, that want something that's very narratively consistent, logically consistent, that's consistent in every which way. So the gameplay, there's not much ludonarrative dissonance in the sense that, like, what happens in the cutscenes is coherent and cohesive with what happens elsewhere in the game during gameplay. So it's not like you're a good person in the cutscenes but then a mass murderer in the gameplay, which is the classic issue that people have run into with games like, for instance, Uncharted, which is where all of this discussion over ludonarrative dissonance even started, and where the term, I believe, was coined. And it's just because, like, you have this really nice guy, family man, who's got a nice rockin' hot wife and living a nice suburban life, and they're just super happy together, and he's a good guy. And then next thing in the cutscene, he's murdering hundreds of people. Okay, not quite murdering, but he's shooting hundreds of people in the face. And then the cutscene starts again, and everything's fine. And usually the distinction is what happens in the cutscene is what we consider, like, canon. That's what we consider lore, what actually happened, whereas everything else is just kind of, it's a game, whatever. There's people that are fine with that, and it's a video game, who cares? It's Fallout 4. You know, we ran into a little kid that's should have starved to death years, like literally over a century, approaching like 2 centuries beforehand. But instead, like, he doesn't, and it's just fun. It's a fun, weird quest in the middle of a video game. Who cares? But then there's the guys that like it super intense, super detailed, and very consistent, that want to buy into this world wholeheartedly and drown in it. And that's what CD Projekt RED tends to do. That's why some people consider their games overwhelming. That's why some teams consider this to be way, way more than they can handle, and other teams or other players are just, whatever, I don't really care, and they're indifferent. And that's okay, but it's good to see that Cyberpunk 2077 is doubling down on what made The Witcher 3 so intriguing and so intense to experience, is that every step of the way, every moment in that game is specifically calibrated and tuned and carefully designed to make sure that that experience is consistent throughout the entire game. And you don't run into a kid in a fridge. You keep that level of immersion all the way throughout, and I'm very glad to see that it's still here. The last thing in this interview that I want to point out, just because it's interesting, and if I didn't talk about it, I would hate myself, is his discussion over villains. Now, in the Cyberpunk universe, I don't know how familiar you are with it, but in the universe, there's a lot of gangs and mega corporations, and these gangs have risen up to defend themselves. And it's very easy in these types of dystopian cyberpunk worlds to make the gangs within it feel very, very campy, feel very cartoonish, very, very comic book, as you might say. But he kind of shoots that down right away. So for instance, he says here, quote, "The machine gang you make a deal with in the game. With the gangs, we really want to emphasize that we don't want them to be our comic book-esque villains. They're not abominations that decided for almost no reason to put cyberware in themselves. It's a dark, dangerous world, and some people who aren't able to make it to the megacorps or don't want it. It's a human need to seek identity, and some people just gravitate towards the gangs. Although their faces are modified, they're still human underneath, and it touches upon a universal feeling that we all have, the need to belong to a group," end quote. And this just once again goes to show, I get it, I'm fanboy, whatever, I don't really care, but this is a level of detail and care in the narrative that really is not found very often. Usually the approach most major companies have to RPGs nowadays is a matter of quantity over quality. They approach throwing as many quests into the game as you possibly can, as many characters as you can, as many interactions as you can, and then just hope you stumble into some high quality stuff along the way, instead of focusing and polishing the crap out of it to the point where no matter where you go, no matter what you do, every second of your gameplay is consistent, believable, and just as intense as the last. And that's why I love Cyberpunk. That's why I love the idea of Cyberpunk. That's why I love CD Projekt RED, because they are unforgiving in that way. But I do want to just be very upfront with this, because I want to be careful with this. We get hyped, we get excited, and maybe this is a downer for this discussion. But this is a Talk Gaming Extra. The entire idea of this type of video is for me to sit down and talk with you guys, to start a conversation. You leave your comments in the comment section below. I read them, then respond in the next video. Like, we can all have this conversation back and forth, so I'm going to say it anyways. With Cyberpunk, there is a huge amount of pressure riding down on CD Projekt RED, and justly so. I don't want to pretend like that's been unearned. Pressure and hype is something that is earned, and it's a compliment when it's granted to your company and your development studio, because it means that the community is so excited for what you have coming next that they're willing to freak out about it, and that's awesome. That's why people freak out over Bethesda games, because their past games have been incredible and it provided some of the best gaming experiences we've ever had as gamers, which is why we're so excited for the next one, for the next Elder Scrolls, for the next Fallout, whatever it is. With Cyberpunk, it's a little different, because CD Projekt RED really wasn't very known, at least in the major AAA sphere, before The Witcher 3, before their last game. So this is really their first go at it as a major world-renowned AAA studio. And that should terrify you. Like, that's a lot of pressure. That's a lot of stuff that's being thrown at them. And it's very easy for us to just overhype it, to get overexcited, to expect too much. Everything I've seen so far has been consistent. And if I see something that I don't like, I will say so. But so far, everything they've said has been fair and has been justified and makes sense in the world and what they're doing. Their discussion, one thing that got a lot of play recently was that in a similar interview, one of the CD Projekt RED employees said that working in the Cyberpunk universe is inherently political, and they don't think there's anything wrong with that. I don't see that as an issue. I find that intriguing, because it says that they're going to an artistically honest place where they're going to push it and be honest with what the conversations are, whatever that may be. So I'm intrigued. I haven't seen anything to dissuade my excitement, which is why I'm excited and why I'm making these videos, like, pumped about it. But I do want us to just bear a healthy amount of skepticism and concern with everything. Because at the very least, if we temper our expectations a little bit, then when we get the game and it blows us away, it's way more than we could have ever dreamed for. And that's why I think they're showing these game demos only to the press, so that the press can describe how awesome it looks, and then we can just imagine it and hope and dream that it's going to be that awesome. And then when they finally show us the gameplay, when they finally show us that stuff, it does honestly blow us away. And I think we'll probably see a gameplay demo for us at E3 next year, and maybe we'll get it on next gen consoles, which is my guess, that they're going to try to wait out this this console generation, which is just my feeling. But it doesn't mean that we can't be excited about it, which, you know, it's frustrating because we want to play it now, but it is what it is. But yes, as I said, thank you for watching. First of all, this is the new space. I haven't really unpacked much of anything. My room is still a total mess. I haven't sound dampened anything in here, so it's probably very echoey. I apologize, but I am excited. There's lots of good stuff that's going to happen in here. The internet and everything is totally fixed, so we're going to go back to a regularized schedule for Talk Gaming. So we're going to start doing that consistently, uploading it to iTunes so that you can listen on the go. All sorts of good stuff like that. It's going to be pretty exciting as we go through the fall. I'm pretty thrilled, and I hope that you are as well. But like I said, let me know what you think of this whole topic of Cyberpunk, of everything, down in the comment section below. I will be reading through all of them. And as always, if you liked the video, hit the like button. If you disliked it, you know what to do. But if you did like it, like the video, maybe consider subscribing. We have a lot of fun over here, and I doubt you will find it to be any different. So thank you for watching. I love you all. Peace out. I'm gonna go unpack and crap. So bye. See ya.